Hello students, welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to go over one of my favorite openings, which is the King's Indian attack. This is an opening that has been played by many excellent players, but the one that got me into it was Bobby Fischer. So it is impossible for me to teach you this lesson without showing you games played by Bobby Fischer. Now, I have to be honest guys, when I first came across this opening, I had mixed feelings. Because as you're going to see in a moment, the idea is that once you have this setup, and I'm going to show you guys everything, how to get to this setup. There are many ways that you could get to it, and this is one of the main things that I like about it, but I'm also going to show you what to do in the middle game. And since this is a system, like we have talked already about the London system, the perk, that you just need to know where your pieces go and the plans. You don't have to memorize too much theory. You're going to see in a moment that you typically continue with something like rook e1, or you could do e5, knight d7, rook e1, and like we learned in our last lesson about the Greek gift, this pawn is really important. It keeps the knight away from defending the king side, and it gives you more space. So it is very nice to attack once you have the pawn here. But after they do something like, I don't know, b6, even b5, when I saw this move that the white pieces do, h4, I really didn't like it. Because at this point in my chess career, I was used to playing the King's Indian defense, the perk, and typically when I attacked in those scenarios, I would do something like knight h4 and then pawn f4. So it would be something like this. Let me go back here. Knight h4, maybe they do something like this, and then I would do f4. So I was used to this pawn formation, which is typical of the King's Indian defense. And by the way, guys, this is the King's Indian defense with colors reversed in many ways when you play the King's Indian attack. So just like I told you in the perk, you could use ideas from the King's Indian defense to use them here, or ideas from the King's Indian attack to use them in the King's Indian defense. But anyhow, I was used to attacking this way, and when I saw the move e5, knight d7, rook e1, b6, when I saw this h4, it was shocking to me. But when you see the way Bobby Fischer used to play it, what he had to offer, of course you're going to like it and you're going to learn more about it. So that's what I'm planning to do, show you the different plans, show you what I have learned. I started playing it like this, but to be honest with you, lately I don't play like this anymore, because you're going to quickly find out that when you get to a certain level, guys, the black pieces know how to defend, and you could get in a position where you have given up so much and you never get to attack the king like Bobby Fischer used to do. So I'm going to show you also the way that I treat it, and that way you have choices for whenever you're going to play this. So again, I'm going to go back a few moves here, and in this lesson I'm going to show you the different setups that you have, at least two main setups that I think you need to know how to play against. It's not the same when the black pieces have this pawn formation or when they have this pawn back here on d6, right? So there are two ways, and I got these ideas from Fischer's games. So I'm going to show you how I approach it depending on what the black pieces do. If they choose this pawn formation in the center, I treat it one way. If they do instead, if they have the pawn on d5, then I treat it on a different way. And lastly, I'm going to show you how, even if they use this, what I typically do instead of using what Bobby Fischer chose in his games. So instead of being this aggressive, I'm going to show you what I've been doing lately just to not compromise so much. So we're gonna get to it, but the first thing that we have to do is learn how we get to this setup. Okay guys, so here we are. The first time I started to play the King's Indian attack, I started to use it against the French defense. So they go e4, e6, and this is how you're going to see it used in many of Bobby Fischer's games. So e4, e6, d3, d5, and now you could simply do knight to d2. So you're gonna see how this is taking shape. So knight f6, knight f3, and now you just need to do g3, bishop g2, and castle, and you got there. So typically, the black pieces could do something like this. You go g3, bishop e7, bishop g2, and then the moment you castled, you got to the same position. Now, I also started to use it against the Sicilian defense. So I'm playing as whites, I play the king's pawn opening. When they play c5, you could just do the same thing, d3, and get to the same position. But what I used to do was knight f3, and I still do it. And then when my opponent is happy to see me playing the open Sicilian, or at least it looks like it, I just do pawn to d3. And after that, I just need to do my fianchetto, maybe something like knight f6, bishop g2. You might see the black pieces here do something like e6. You see, this is what I told you before. And you could see them also just do the fianchetto, and castle, bishop g7, knight b to d2, castle, and you get to the same position. So this is how you typically get to it, by playing it against the French, playing it against the Sicilian. But guys, you know that I like, when I teach you a new opening, I want you to use it a lot and get the hang of it. So if you play e4, maybe you never get it, because if people play the Scandinavian, if they play the Caro-Kann, if they play e5, you're not going to have an opportunity to play it. So the way I ended up playing it, and this is very cool because you're going to make sure that you always play the King's Indian attack regardless of what they do. And I like it because you're going to get a lot of experience with it, but I also like it because you don't have to memorize so much theory. I got to a point in my career that I hadn't played for a few years. I didn't have my openings prepared, so I just said, you know what, I'm going to play this tournament and I'm going to play the King's Indian attack. So what did I do? I would start with knight f3 first. Regardless of what they do in the center, this is what I'm going to do. So you could transpose, maybe they do something like the Sicilian, g3, knight c6, bishop g2, e6, I castled. And now look, they could do d6, remember that I told you? You need to know what to do if they do this, or they could do d5. Now I go d3, and I know you've seen this before in my lessons, because I have told you, if you want to practice the perk, you could use it as the white pieces too, right? And this is the same thing. So after knight f6, you go knight b to d2, and finally, when you break on e4, this is the King's Indian attack. You get the same position, but you did not start with e4. So again, guys, you don't have to do it like this, like just play the King's Indian attack, but at least if you want to practice it, you could start by doing knight f3 first, and then you transpose into the King's Indian attack. So I hope this makes sense. Now let's talk about the middle game plans, because this is the most important thing. If you get this set up, but you don't know what to do next, what's the point? So let me go back, and I'm going to show you first two games played by Bobby Fischer, and these two games are the ones that gave me the main middle game plans that I typically use. And then I'm going to show you what I end up doing now when I play at a certain level that I know my opponents are going to give me a hard time. So the first game, Bobby Fischer is playing with the white pieces, and it goes e4, e6, d3, d5, French defense, and now we have knight d2, knight f6, g3. Notice that now after the black pieces did c5, this is going to look also like a Sicilian defense. So they could have started with c5, then e6, and eventually d5. So after c5, we go bishop g2, knight c6, knight g to f3, bishop e7, I castle, they castle, and this is the position that you're going to see over and over and over. And guys, it's been 7 moves. If you know how to put your pieces like this, you're going to be fine. So this is another cool thing about the King's Indian attack. It is extremely simple to put in practice, and then it could turn into a very aggressive game, or it could also turn into a very positional game depending on what you like. So after they castled, the white pieces went pawn to e5, and this is the main plan. So after we do e5, the knight needs to move, and we already confiscated the f6 square. Now I wanted to make a quick note here. It is considered that rook e1 is a little bit better than just doing e5 right away, and if the black pieces take on e4, they're basically giving up the guardian of e4. So now I'm going to take back with the pawn, and by the time I push, I'm going to have that available for a piece like a knight. Before, when I do this right away and they go knight to d7, rook e1, I never have this available, at least not for now, to put a piece there. So you could just think of this as well. Let me put the rook on e1 first. If they take, I take back, and when I push, my knight is going to go to e4. Now, you might be thinking, what if they do e5 first? Well, we talked about this a few lessons ago, guys, that d5 starts to become weak. So I might be thinking of moving my knight, bishop g5, eliminate that defender of d5, and eventually my knight is going to go to d5. So basically, e5 is just creating weaknesses already on the light squares. So that was just a quick note there. If you just decide to do e5 like Bobby Fischer, that's fine. Then rook e1, and you get this thematic position. So after rook e1, b5, the black pieces typically expand on the queen side. Then the white pieces here did knight f1, pawn to b4. And now, guys, this is the move that I didn't like, but it makes sense, of course, after you see the games and you understand why they do it. So pawn to h4, then a5. They keep expanding on the queen side. Bishop f4, guys. This is something that happens every time. So this is your middle game plan. The transition from opening to middle game when you play like this is going to be that e5. The rook is only one, then h4. The knight goes to f1, and the bishop is open to go to f4. So many people might not like this bishop being blocked by the pawn, but it is extremely important. And you're going to see later how everything makes sense. So after bishop f4, we have pawn to a4. Now pawn to a3 that Bobby decided to do here. Interesting move. B takes a3, B takes a3, and then knight a5. So again, black pieces are going to expand on the queen side. We're going to expand on the king side and attack. Now, I wanted to say something about this position here. Sometimes, going back to this bishop here, sometimes the black pieces like to do queen c7. And actually, let me go back here. Let's say they had done queen c7. Well, you have this idea of doing knight to e3. And again, you have to think about it. But just to show you, let's say bishop e7. And now you could do knight takes d5. So this is a trick for you to keep in mind, just for you to know that it is out there. So you could do knight d5, and when the pawn takes, you have that discovered attack on the queen, and you pick up the knight. So you pick up the knight, you open up the file. So again, you have to be better here as whites, just for you guys to know it. So let me go back, and I'm going to go all the way here. Look, we have the original setup that we just got to it, then we castled, then castle, and we go e5, knight d7, rook e1. The moment you got this, you engage, you know you're going to engage in this king side attack. So at this point, they decided to do b5. So knight f1, pawn to b4, then h4, the move that we talked about already, a5, bishop f4, and a4. They're doing their thing. Here, the white pieces decided to do a3, pawn takes, and then knight a5. So at this point, we have knight e3, like we mentioned before. The queen is not going to be on c7, but if it were, we take, pawn takes, and e6. At least it's something for you to consider, guys. So after bishop a6, and this is another thing that I always kept in mind after reviewing Fischer's games, I realized that whenever the bishop left this diagonal, it is a good idea to put my bishop on that diagonal. So you're going to see how at some point it makes sense to sacrifice the bishop on e6. So I just saw what he did, I understood the ideas, and I just created my own rules. So bishop leaves this diagonal, my bishop goes on that diagonal. Do I have to do it every time? No, but it is going to pop up in my head the moment I see that. So bishop h3 happened here, putting pressure again on e6. And then after d4, notice how the black pieces start creating weaknesses. At least they give us some squares that we can use, like c4, e4. So you're going to see how the white pieces use this a4 square. So this is another idea for you to use in the middle game. e4, I know that I want to use it for my pieces. So after d4, the knight goes back to f1, then knight to b6, knight g5. Finally, we're using this support to get closer to the king. Guys, basically we're trying to provoke a move like h6. That's going to be a weakness that we need in order to sacrifice, in order to make contact with that castle. So after knight g5, they did knight d5, they're hitting the bishop, so bishop d2, then bishop takes on g5, bishop takes on g5. Notice how the bishop is going back and forth, but it doesn't matter. We know what we want, we're going after that king. So after bishop g5, the queen gets out of the way. And now guys, who do we need to bring over to put more pressure on the king side? Of course we have to bring the queen. So queen goes to h5, and then the black pieces start making space for the king to escape in case things get complicated. So rook f to c8. Now this knight that is doing nothing is going to use that square. So knight d2, knight d4, and maybe we even sacrifice on f6. So knight goes to d2, knight c3, and now a very powerful move that you really have to understand, guys. We need to break these perfect defenses for the black king, and a move that is thematic here is actually bishop f6, sometimes bishop h6. If we had a knight over here, even better, but in this case, the white pieces went bishop f6. Now, in this case, the black pieces did not even take, they just went queen e8. But if they had done something like g6, well, we know this. We just go queen e6 and checkmate is coming. If they had taken on f6, I would like you guys to pause the video and see if you can continue this position. Fischer did it, so definitely it has to be a good move here. He has to have a very good continuation to finish the game. But the question is, can you make it work? Let's say you got to this position in the tournament game, your opponent took on f6, how do we continue? Well guys, the idea here was to simply take back, and instead we don't have the bishop anymore, but we have the pawn offering support on g7. So after king h8 trying to bring the rook and help, we just need to do knight f3, bring in the knight, knight d5, trying to eliminate that pivot pawn, but it's just too late. We have queen h6 now threatening the checkmate that we already spoke about, rook g8. Now instead of going to g5, because they could simply take, we could do, and don't forget guys that we already gave up, don't forget that we already gave up the bishop, so they could easily sacrifice a rook. So instead, knight e5, hitting the queen, hitting f7, even putting pressure on g6. So after queen c7, we have a maneuver that you're going to see later, which is this bishop going back to g2. It looks really slow, but there's not much they could do once the bishop gets to e4. So after the bishop gets to e4, putting pressure on h7, notice how we have so many pieces, including the pawn, putting pressure on that king. So this is what Fischer had in mind. As you can see, it's not a quick checkmate that he had in mind when he sacrificed the bishop, but weakening, opening up the king is going to allow his pieces to enter and finish the game. So instead, the black pieces went queen e8. They're not going to accept that gift. So knight e4, using that square that we mentioned before for our pieces to come into the game. So pawn to g6, then queen to g5, getting out of the way. We don't want to get to h6 because they could easily bring the queen over and make us leave. And of course, we do not want to trade queens, guys. We're attacking. We gotta keep our pieces on the board. So queen to g5 happened. Finally, knight takes e4. Now our rook is going to transfer over to attack as well. So after rook e4, we have pawn to c4. Notice how they keep expanding here, and the white pieces are going for that king. So we have finally pawn to h5, not only trying to undermine the defenses, but trying to make this available for the rook. So after pawn to h5, we have c takes d3, rook h4, then rook a7, trying to defend through the 7th rank, but it is not going to be so easy. Bishop g2, you see the same maneuver to bring the bishop over. Now d takes e2, queen h6, guys, with threatening checkmate. They have no time to do anything else here. And even though the queen is keeping an eye on c1, if they had done now c1, rook takes, we're not going to make the queen leave. We're going to go king h2 because we're threatening checkmate and more. So after queen h6, queen f8, and now guys, there is a very nice combination that the white pieces did here. So if you've never seen this game before, pause the video and see if you can find the winning combination to deliver checkmate. If you have seen this video before, anyways, try to visualize it and do it in your head all over again. So I trust that you pause the video and try to find the winning continuation. The next move here is a forcing queen h7 check. Only move is to take on h7. Now pawn takes check, and the king can only go to g6 or to g8. If they go to g8, of course, checkmate in one move. If instead they take on g6, then we have bishop e4 and checkmate. So guys, this is the first game that I saw with the King's Indian attack, and of course I like this. I couldn't wait to use it in my games, and I have to tell you, I got many nice combinations, many nice attacks with it. I never got this exact position, of course, but I got really nice games. But as I started to play stronger opponents, they wouldn't let me get this far. Like, everyone knows this, especially if you played the French defense, if you played the Sicilian, you're familiar with this position. So quickly, I needed to adapt, and that's what I'm going to show you in a moment. Before I get to it, let me go all of the way back. Okay guys, so before I show you what I wanted to tell you from my experience, I'm going to show you the beginning of another game played by Fischer, where actually was a Sicilian defense. e4, c5, knight f3, e6, And then at this point, he just went d3. And this is how I play it. So if I'm playing at f3, the moment they do their second move, I'm going to do d3. And I get into the King's Indian attack. So knight to c6, g3, g6, bishop g2, bishop g7, castle, knight g2, e7. Now I want you to pay attention to the black pieces pawn formation. Notice that they have not defined if they want to do d6 or d5. So after knight g2, e7, rook e1, and this is exactly what I do. They haven't defined, I'm going to continue with rook e1. And then in this game, they decided to do d6. Now, guys, if they had done d5, this is the same pawn formation we saw in the other game, but the knight happens to be on e7 instead of f6. Now, why am I going over this so carefully? Because it makes the difference. So what I do is when they do pawn to d6, I forget about this e5, at least for now, and this is what I do. I insert pawn to c3. And the most important thing is not this e5 push. It has to do actually with this knight. So when this pawn was on d5, and let me go back again, they're putting pressure on e4, I'm going to do knight d2. So I'm bringing more support to it. But if they do d6, we're going to go about it in a different way. At least that's what I do. You don't have to do it. But after pawn to d6, again, there's no pressure on e4. This is what Bobby Fischer did, and this is what I do from the moment I saw this game. So what he did was pawn to c3. This is what I like the most about it. After c3, they castled. Then we break on d4. You see the plan changes. C takes d4, C takes d4, and now this square becomes available for your knight. So this is the main distinction. Your knight is not going to come out through d2. It is going to come out to c3. Now in this game, the black pieces did d5. They need to claim the center and do something. So he just went e5. Look, same pawn, gaining more space on the king side. And after bishop d7, knight to c3. So this is the main distinction that I want you to remember. If, again, the black pieces go d5 right away, we come with a knight to d2. And then you could use what Bobby Fischer does, or you could do what I'm going to show you guys that I end up doing most of the time now. If instead they do pawn to d6, I quickly switch, I go to c3, and then I'm going to do d4. So a little bit slow, but you get control of the center, your knight goes to c3, and this is a very nice position that you get. So if they don't do d5, fine, you're going to do knight c3 anyways. Let's say a6, knight c3, you develop the bishop, and you get a very nice game. In this specific position, in this specific game that Fischer played, the black pieces went d5, pawn to e5, and just to show you a little bit more, after bishop d7, knight c3, we have rook c8, and again, look, the same bishop, he put it on f4. So I'm learning from him. I'm like, okay, in this other system, he also did the bishop f4 plan. The only change is my knight going to c3. So knight a5, rook c1, b5, b3, so there's no knight going to c4. Then b4, the knight is transferring, look, from the queen side to the king side. Bishop b5, queen d2. It looks like he wants to go bishop a6. We've seen this pattern from other lessons. And now after knight a goes back to c6, the knight was doing nothing on a5, we have this idea of g4. So this is something else, guys. The pawn went to g4, and it's another way to attack. Before, we saw something like h4, which is not going to help us that much. So I'm going to show you only a few more moves for you to see how he got set up to attack. So after pawn to g4, they went pawn to a5, and now this interesting plan that I liked. The knight went to g3. So look, all of your pieces over here putting pressure on the king side. So now the knight is going to help with h4 and h5. So after queen b6, we have pawn h4, knight goes to b4 trying to reroute, bishop h6, we've seen these ideas before, knight to d7, queen g5, rook takes e1, rook takes e1, and now after bishop takes, queen takes, we have rook to c8. I guess trying to get the king out, trying to simplify the game as well. So they just went rook takes, knight takes, and finally pawn to h5. Now, guys, you know what? I'm gonna finish. I'm gonna show you the entire game. I was just gonna show you the beginning of it. Sorry that I'm going extremely fast, but this is a game that it's out there everywhere on the internet. You can always access it and learn more about it. So after h5, queen d8, the same thing. The queen is rushing to come over and help. But then we have knight g5, threatening to take on h7, so they have no choice but to put the knight there. So after knight f8, look, same pattern. The bishop is going to go to e4. This pattern, guys, I use it, of course, when I play the king's Indian attack, but I've used it in so many other positions that have nothing to do with it. So bishop e4, if they take, this knight is going to take and go to the dark squares that are weak. So after bishop e4, forget about taking, they just went queen e7, and now the final combination started here, guys. So we're putting a lot of pressure on h7. The bishop is indirectly putting pressure as well. So they went knight takes h7, knight takes back, h takes g6. So now we're always threatening something here. So after h takes g6, f takes g6, bishop takes g6, knight g5, getting away from the attack. If they had done something like queen g7, we could still take, followed by queen e6, and this is definitely a winning position. Now, in the game, again, they went knight to g5, and now we have knight h5, again, trying to access that square. Knight f3 check, we just need to get out of it. Knight h4, king g3 is going to keep us safe, then knight takes g6, and now can you find the next move? It's not queen g6, so what do we do as the white pieces? Well, the move here, guys, is obviously knight f6. The king has to move to f7, and then check followed by checkmate. Alright, guys, so there you go. You have the entire game. These two games are a must watch if you want to understand the King's Indian attack and the way Bobby Fischer used to play it. Now, the last thing that I wanted to do is go back here. Let's do it all over again, and let me tell you what I end up doing now. Because if you don't have the caliber that Bobby Fischer had, that he could make anything work, then you're going to encounter positions where you cannot make progress and you just get stuck on the king side. So let me show you this position. And same thing, I go knight d2. Actually, let me go back. Let's say we start like this. e6, bishop e2, knight f6, castle, c5, d3, knight c6, knight b to d2, g6, e4, bishop g7, rook e1, and they castle. Okay, so you get to this position. Guys, it's not a big deal if the knight is here or the knight is here. It's not a big deal if the bishop is on g7 or e7. I've gotten many games, tournament games, in this position, and then what I end up doing is, instead of e5, and by the way, especially if they have the fianchetto, it is, at least to me, it is not so easy to just do e5, knight d7. Look, it's been hit 3 times, so it is not so easy to make this work, and then when you start pushing, it's not so easy, even if you do g4 and so on, especially if you're playing a strong opponent. So what I do here, guys, is e takes d5. So I want you to have fun with pushing when it makes sense, but even when it makes sense to do e5, you could look into e takes d5, and then they could take either way. I don't mind it. I'm going to continue with this maneuver. Knight b3, hitting c5, they defend it, and then I break on d4. So I like to play it like this, because now if they take, I'm going to take with my knight. I get an isolated pawn from my opponent, which is blocked by a knight, which is ideal, and then I'm going to do c3, and at least I feel so comfortable with it. So they could do something like this, bishop b7, c3, and I'm happy to play this position anytime. So I'm putting pressure on it, it's blocked, my bishop is coming out. This is just fine by me. I'm okay in this position. If this is too passive for you, you just don't like it, you don't have to play it. But I've gotten very nice games with it, so feel free to just give it a try. The other way this could go is the following. They could do c4, knight d2, and then you could see people doing something like b5, and you're going to go c3, bishop b7, knight e5. So this is things that I have actually gotten in my games. Now, in this position, don't be surprised if you see people doing moves like b4, and then you have a tactic. You could do knight c4 right away, because remember we're hitting c6, or you could take first and then you take on c4, eventually go to e5. So there's still little tricks here and there that you could utilize. I agree it's not as exciting as the other positions, but it's just for you to have an alternative. Don't feel like if you play the King's Indian attack, you have to do what Bobby Fischer used to do, and if you get stuck, you wouldn't know what to do after. I remember I had another game where they took with the knight, and I did the same thing. Here, d4, c4, and now my knight went back to d2. I didn't really care that they were hitting d4 because I'm hitting c4. So it could continue with c3, knight e4, take, I'm ready to do c4, and then most people are going to do b5, preventing you from doing so, but then I'm already finding good squares for my pieces. If they didn't, if they just did bishop b7, you could do again c4, or you could do knight e5. And guys, you get so nice squares for your pieces. So again, it's more positional. It's not so much about that crazy attack, but I like it, and it's just something for you to keep in mind. So guys, let me know if you have any questions. Like always, I think you're ready to start playing the King's Indian attack. Remember, if you really want to get experience with it, try to start in the games like this, and then you eventually do d3, knight d2, and e4. If not, just have it there. If you already play e4, have it there for whenever they play the French or the Sicilian defense. So as always, I'm going to talk to you guys in the comments. Let me know any questions, any comments you might have, and you know that I'm going to reply to you as quickly as I can. So I'll see you guys in our next lesson.